Dear Hindol Sengupta, welcome to Magiskt Tänkande.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm so glad we connected and that you invited me. I am grateful for your time, and we are talking, of course, in a time of unprecedented global emergency. But I think perhaps there's no better time than this to talk about the inner self and matters of the inner self. So I'm grateful for your attention and your time.
Yeah, that's very true. I bought your book 5 years ago in Delhi.
Oh, you got it in Delhi. I was wondering where you bought it.
For a Westerner, it's very helpful. It's been helpful for me understanding the Hindu way of thinking. And, well, I don't know how many people in Sweden have read it, but it should be helpful if anyone here also is interested, the way I am.
Yeah, yeah, and there are people who are interested in Hinduism in Sweden and in broader Scandinavia. I actually have some history with Sweden. I used to go to Lund. I have not only been to Sweden, I've lived in Lund for 2, 3 weeks. I've been to Malmo, to Stockholm. So I have very fond memories of Sweden.
In this podcast, we try to understand the pandemic from different perspectives. So I have invited you to speak about this global crisis from an Indian, or more specifically, a Hindu horizon.
Yes.
To sort of discover what is a Hindu approach to this situation and how does this approach differ from a Western Christian one. But let's start with you telling the Swedish listeners a bit about yourself. Who are you, Hindol Sengupta?
That's, of course, as you know, Patrick, to a Hindu, that is a fundamental question.
I know.
Who am I is a very deep and profound question.
The most important question, maybe.
The most important question, yeah. No, well, I mean, of course, a Hindu believes that there are only 3 questions worth answering in life. Who am I, what do I want, and what is my purpose? And of those, of course, who am I is the most important question. I'm a seeker primarily. I was a journalist for a long time. My initial training was in journalism. So I was born in this tiny town called Jamshedpur, which has one of India's oldest and biggest steel companies and steel mills. The Tatas, the group of Tatas, some listeners may know this big Indian conglomerate called the Tatas. They also own Jaguar Land Rover. So that is their home, Tata Nagar or Jamshedpur. I was born there. My initial training was in journalism, and I then trained to be a filmmaker. So I spent a large part of my early career in television journalism. So I worked in business television and general news television with CNN in India and CNBC and Bloomberg TV and so on and so forth. Then I spent most of the last decade in magazine journalism as editor-at-large for the Fortune magazine's India edition. So as a business journalist. This is the time, of course, when I wrote my 9 books. And then I spent the last couple of years, I went away to study at Columbia Business School for a while as a Knight Badgett Fellow at Columbia Business School. And then I became a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and got a Shivning Scholarship to go to Oxford, where I was at the South Asia department, studying Indian international relations. And then I returned, and I'm currently with the Indian government, where I work in the Ministry of Commerce in an organization called Invest India, which is the investment promotion agency of the government of India. So that's my professional life, so to speak. But my life as a writer, I've written 9 books. I'm looking to write a few more. I am contractually obligated to write a few more, so I'm working on them. I began by writing a lot about Indian economics and politics, but increasingly I found myself getting more and more interested and deeply motivated to write about Hinduism, which is the religion that I belong to. And I wrote 2 books on Hinduism, and I am now in the process of writing a 3rd. So that, in a nutshell, has been my journey.
I see. Thank you. So you live in Delhi now?
I do. I live in Delhi.
What's the situation like for the moment in Delhi?
Well, we have been in lockdown for nearly 40 days now. But I think we're on the 35th or 36th day. We've been under complete lockdown. apart from essential services, we don't really step out of the house. So we step out maybe once a week, maybe once in 10 days to buy some supplies. But otherwise, everything is shut. All offices are shut. All transportation is shut. All flights are shut. All schools and colleges are shut. So we're in complete lockdown.
So this must be a very different Delhi, because I know that city is very crowded.
Yes, it's a very interesting Delhi. I don't think we will ever see in our lifetime Delhi like this ever again. It's a cleaner and greener Delhi than we have ever known it.
Yeah.
Delhi has a lot of air pollution problems otherwise, but this is, we're in the middle, we're nearly at the end of April, and it's barely warm in Delhi. By this time, the summer in Delhi would have really have started, bearing down. But it just goes to show that when human activity goes away, how wonderfully nature takes care of itself.
That's very
The
true.
evenings have been very cool, very pleasant. Every time it's a little hot, it starts to rain. So the natural cycle of nature has come back again. The Yamuna River, which cuts through Delhi, the great Yamuna River, is clean once again. The great Ganga River is clean. So unprecedented, environmental bliss, even though, of course, in the middle of a global pandemic. India is at about more than 27,000 cases at the moment. Still very, the numbers are very low compared to our population, 1.3 billion. But yeah, I mean, hopefully we will get through this. We will get through this and, live to see another day. But there are great environmental lessons to be learned from this, and I hope we learn some of them.
Yes, but do you think it's necessary to go back to normal after?
I think it's very important for all of us to try and understand what is normal. What we think of as normal may not actually be normal, right?
True.
So this normal, this illusion of normalcy is something we should all consider deeply, right? And I think it's worth pondering carefully about what we think is normal and what it really means, right? And I think both in our inner life and in our outer life, I think we created a universe or a world where a lot of abnormal things were normalized. I don't think the kind of environmental degradation that we have done is normal by any stretch of imagination. It is a byproduct of our excesses, a byproduct of our greed, byproduct of, our malice, all kinds of things, right? So when we say we have to go back to normal, I hope we don't go back to that normal, because that's not normal. Right?
That's very true.
Normal is an entirely different thing. And normal is really feeling interconnected as human beings, with the planet, with the environment around us, and understanding as Hindu philosophy, since we're talking about Hinduism, in Hindu philosophy, there is no difference in a sense between your inner self and your outer self, right? The Atman and the Brahman, the universal consciousness and the personal soul, so to speak, or the personal consciousness or the individual consciousness. And both of these two things are one and the same thing, because the individual consciousness is only a part of the universal consciousness. And that's very easy to understand, because after all, whatever is happening inside us, as many of us understand, is really whatever is happening outside us, is really in a sense a reflection of what is happening inside us. So if we feel hate, we see hate outside, right? If we feel love, we see love outside.
True.
If we feel joy, we see joy outside. If we feel sorrow, then we see sorrow outside, right? And that's having understood that fundamental thing, the world that we have created of extreme degradation and killing every other living being for man, the human race to survive, I mean, that doesn't work. We know it doesn't work anymore. So I really hope, Patrick, we don't go back to that normal.
Let's hope so. Let me put a question this way. Being Hindu, where is your God in this drama?
What is God, Patrick? I would begin with that question, right? I mean, as you understand, for Hindus, Hindus are able to see, or Hindus ought to be able to see God everywhere. And this is what confuses many other religions. Because if I were to argue to you, Patrick, that for a Hindu, God is really within. Swami Vivekananda, one of the great Indian mystics, Hindu mystics, said every soul is potentially divine, right? Which simply means that what is God? You are God. The great Upanishadic exposition, as it were, Tattvamasi, you are that, right? That which you seek outside, you are that. Aham Brahmasmi, the universal consciousness lies within you. So you are God. But what does that really mean when one says you are God? Well, it only means that every person has the potential to realize the divinity within themselves, right? Realize that the godliness within themselves, right? But you may turn around and say, well, if that's really true, then how come Hindus have all these many gods and goddesses and so on and so forth? Well, it's a very simple explanation. Because God is within us, our sort of intrinsic inner self is the divine. Any manifestation that we see it, like your soul, as a Hindu, I would argue that, the same godliness that lies within me lies within you, Patrick, right? Lies with every human being, right? But you don't look like me, you don't talk like me, your tastes in food are not like me, the books and the clothes that you like are not like mine, right? So why should we, when we think of God outside us as an image, we don't have to think about the same thing at all. So you may think of the body of Christ, so to speak, on the cross of Calvary. Somebody else may think of Krishna playing the flute. Somebody else may think of the great ascetic Shiva. Somebody else may think of the goddess, right? And so on and so forth. So each person, depending on what appeals to them, manifests the idea of God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's perfectly acceptable to the Hindus because they understand like every human being looks different, and seems different and has different tastes. And yet deep within their inner self is the universal consciousness. So that doesn't change. But the manifestation can be infinite, right? So if you come and tell the Hindu, well, I see God in a jug of water, the Hindu is not surprised. It's not blasphemy to the Hindu. Because maybe for some reason that jug is sacred to you, right? And you see God in it, that's perfectly fine. And you wish to worship that jug of water, right? So therefore, if God is all-pervasive, omnipotent and omnipresent, then everything is the divine. There is a great monk, or actually that's not the only monk, I've heard it from one monk, but many people have of course said this in Hinduism, that the question in Hinduism, or the answer to the question, what is God, right? The Hindus would answer the question by saying God is, full stop. Because there is nothing that is not God, including the question, what is God, right? So the Hindus would never answer the question, what is God, by saying this is God or that is God. They would just answer the question by saying God is, full stop. Because there is nothing that is beyond God. Everything emanates from God and everything collapses into God, right? So there is this separation is something that the Hindu does not see, right? And that's why it's a little difficult for many people to understand Hinduism, because it's a contradiction, right? By saying, on one hand, one is saying everything is that one universal consciousness, but there are all these gods and goddesses. But it's a very simple explanation. Those gods and goddesses are only individual manifestations of that universal consciousness. Whatever appeals to you, the universal consciousness resides there too, right? So that's how I would explain it.
As a Westerner, we think very distinctively in an inner world and an outer world, and you speak about the connection, very tight connection. Do you still see two worlds, or do you see only one?
Hinduism, of course, has many, philosophies, so to speak, right? There are many schools of thought. But one of the most potent, Advaita Vedanta, at its very core, the Hindu does not see any difference between the outer world and the inner world.
Interesting.
Because for Hindus, the outer world is merely a manifestation of the inner world, inner self. So what happens inside happens outside. In Advaita Vedanta, which is one of the sort of great streams of philosophies within Hinduism, there's a wonderful analogy of the snake and the rope, or the rope and the snake. In the darkness, if you see a piece of rope, you could immediately think of it or imagine it to be a snake. And if you do, immediately all the emotions that you attach to seeing a snake would come in your mind. It could be fear, it could be horror, it could be wanting to run away, it could be, frightened and frozen, all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
If you're a genuine animal lover, it could even be affection for a snake. I mean, that's also possible, of course. But some emotion would come when you think of a snake, right? But the point is, it's actually not a snake. It is a piece of rope. And because you're in darkness, and darkness here is a metaphor for ignorance, you think of the rope as the snake. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's interesting.
So the outer world is like that snake we imagine. It doesn't really exist. It is really a piece of rope, right? And it is because we are in darkness, and as I said, darkness here is a reflection of manifestation of the idea of ignorance. Therefore, we see things for what it is. Some Hindus would call it Maya, the great illusion. And where does attachment come from? It comes from Maya. You believe that you're this independent I, self, and therefore this is mine, and that is mine, and this is my parents, and these are my possessions, and so on and so forth. Without realizing that this I that you think of as this ego, it actually is only the observer. There's a wonderful story, Patrick. Let me share this with you. There's a businessman who goes up to the Himalayas and meets this ascetic, this great monk, Himalayan monk. And he tells the monk, well, I'm really unhappy, and all these things in my life are going wrong, and I'm really desperately unhappy. Please help me. And the monk asks him, tells him, if you can observe, or if you know that you're unhappy, then you're not unhappy. And the man says, what do you mean? He says, well, you already can see the difference. You are the observer who's seeing yourself unhappy. So you have already understood that all these feelings, they are just emotions coming in your mind. And they will go from your mind.
Yeah.
You are the still observer. Right? So the man goes away and comes back in a few days and says, Master, I'm really happy. I've understood what you said. I am now really happy. Immediately the monk says, no, you just know that you're happy. You are not happy. It's an emotion that's coming in the mind, and it will go away. You are not happy. You're observing happiness within yourself, in your mind. The Buddhists call it the monkey mind, right? Mind constantly dominates. And the Hindus think of it like that too, that you are not your mind, you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're the still observer. The great Hindu believer, Ram Das, I recently read a beautiful quote from him, and I'm going to share with you. He said, death is not sorrowful, death is not sadness, death is not loss, death is not something to grieve, grief, death is not something to feel, crushed with sadness with. Death is only the taking off of a tight shoe.
That's beautiful.
And that's so beautiful, isn't it? It's a beautiful, beautiful thought. Death is only the taking off of a tight shoe. Because, your consciousness is at that time in this body. And when the body falls away, your consciousness is merged back into the universal consciousness.
I'm thinking about meditation as a technique to reach these insights. I mean, one way is talking about them as we are doing now, but you can also, I suppose, you can use meditation as to reach an experience, personal experience of this kind.
Absolutely. And I would argue very strongly, very, very strongly, that while it is really interesting and it's very important to read about these things and talk about them and discuss them and understand them, they are not even an iota, not even a drop compared to actually experiencing it.
Are you meditating? Are you meditating yourself?
I am.
Do
I'm
you
not.
do you?
I'm,
Oh,
I
sorry.
would not argue that I'm always extremely successful in it, but I'm definitely on a journey.
Do you use any special techniques, or do you use a mantra, or what kind of
Well,
meditation do
I
you
mean,
do?
depends. There also, I have refused to be confined by one mantra, so I use whatever works that day. So
Okay.
sometimes I may use the Vipassana technique, which is to observe your breath.
Yeah.
Sometimes I might use a mantra, which goes on and on, again and again and again to sort of silence the mind, right? Sometimes I would just be silent and not even use a mantra and just keep observing my thoughts come and go until they start to fade away. And they might come back again, but the idea is to keep letting them fade away, not letting them take control of that moment. Um, and I would argue very strongly that even the smallest iota of experiencing it is far more valuable than all the books of Hinduism in the whole world. Nothing beats the experience. This is not to say satsang, as the Hindus would say, is not important. Satsang is very important, which is meeting like-minded people, talking about, you know, these aspects, the inner life, and so on and so forth. All this is very important because you have to create around you in your life a space for the inner life, right? Otherwise, it might just be that, we find no space for it at all. So satsang, or the company of like-minded people for the inner life, is important. But all the books, all the knowledge, nothing compares to a moment of having experienced it.
True. Let me complicate this idea of God being everything and everywhere all the time.
Yes.
If I put it like this, the virus is also God. How does that statement sound to you? Since we are all manifestations of the same divinity, can we view the virus also as another manifestation of this basic oneness? The virus as a less evolved manifestation of divinity?
Of course. We should. And it's quite clear what manifestation it would be, right? Look at the number of lessons that the virus is teaching us. Let's look at them one by one. If we were to agree that the virus began as a byproduct of the quote unquote wet markets of China, right?
Yeah.
Well, the first fundamental lesson almost is a Hindu lesson that if you constantly kill living beings only for your exotic tastes, one day nature will hit back. Right?
Right.
It's as simple as that. I mean, I am not entirely vegetarian, but I'm going as close as possible to vegetarianism. I still eat eggs. But it is quite clear, every research in the world shows that a greater amount of vegetarianism is better for the world.
True.
So if we were to look at that lesson, then, the wet markets of Wuhan, from where the virus started, immediately gives us the first lesson. The second lesson, autocratic regimes do not allow information to come out which can help others. And that sort of extreme manifestation of power can never be good. That's lesson number 2. It hasn't even been good for the country where it originated. So many thousands of their people died, right?
Right.
So clearly that kind of autocratic power is not good for the world or for the human race. Lesson number 2. Lesson number 3, the world needed to pause.
Also
We
true.
couldn't have gone on the way we were going on. The world was collapsing. I mean, surely as a thoughtful person, Patrick, you would have felt this, and many of us felt it, especially in the last 5 years, that the world was, in a sense, exploding in front of our eyes.
Yes.
Every country, right? Extreme behavior in every country. Whether it was the West or the East or the North or the South, whatever, it was almost like human beings were going mad.
True.
So we have been forced to pause from this reckless lives that we were leading.
That's very interesting because, as I said, I first time in India was '86, and then I've been coming back several times, and so I've seen the country change and develop, and many of the things for good. But last time in Delhi, the air pollution was terrible. You know, we had to leave Delhi earlier than we had planned because of the air pollution. So. Of course, that's something valuable in this pause that's happening now, that you can breathe again.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So many lessons, isn't it?
It is, really.
So, I mean, I would not doubt at all that this pandemic is also a part of, as the Hindus would say, the grand Leela, you know, the playfulness of the divine, so to speak.
But maybe
Right.
also in this case, the school of the divine then.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And playfulness doesn't always mean like, you know, good things have to happen, so to speak. Sometimes lesson can come in cruel ways too, right? Or at least what seems like to be cruel to us. There's so many lessons, so many lessons.
And you could call them divine lessons then, in a way. This is a education from the divine.
Because I mean, as a Hindu, I would say there is the divine in everything. And that's not an easy lesson to, I mean, I understand that this is not an easy lesson for, I mean, you know, for somebody who's maybe lost somebody in their family due to this disease and so on and so forth to immediately understand or comprehend. And that's fine. And of course, I mean, when we lose something that's dear to us, whether it's a job or whether, God forbid, a family member or a friend and so on and so forth, it's of course tragic. And you know, of course it is heartbreaking. But the point is that the world was collapsing, where the world needed a pause. And this is perhaps the only, I mean, think about it, even during the world wars, people were not forced to be at home like this. This is probably the first time in human history that a large number of people are being forced to remain at home. Surely there is a lesson embedded in that. Surely there's a lesson embedded in that.
Could the concept of karma also be used collectively in this picture of the
Yes, well, we
virus?
don't, I mean, often we don't understand karma very well. But let me say this, at a very fundamental level, karma is that every action that you do will have a repercussion, right? And in this case, it is very clear that karma is going to have a repercussion, and indeed had a repercussion, because the kind of destruction that we wrought on the environment, it has come back to haunt us.
So you speak about karma also as a sort of collective force, not only an individual one.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you know, for instance, we were talking about wet markets, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's karma, clearly. You know, you maintained something which was so detrimental and only for your private greed. And it's collective karma because it's not just one person going there to buy, lots of people going there and so on and so forth. And, you know, karma then finally took its toll. So, of course, there's collective karma.
It's interesting because I find similarities with the concept of sin in Christianity and Western culture. That's because you could also say that we have sinned against nature, and this is the answer we get.
I say in my book that there is no sin in Hinduism. Since you've read my book, I mean, you know that I argue that one of the big differences between Christianity and Hinduism is that there is no sin in Hinduism, in the sense that there is only ignorance in Hinduism. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Sin, the idea of sin is deeply embedded in an external force punishing you for something. Whereas the Hindu would believe that your ignorance manifests into situations through which you draw lessons. So you're ignorant about something and you do something, And that creates a situation then that teaches you a tough lesson.
And the goal is to drop this ignorance, to get insight and move on.
Drop this ignorance.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the goal, is to drop this ignorance. Yes, elevation.
Yeah, that's
because the only problem with sin is that the Hindu does not, the Hindu belief is different from Christianity, because, Christianity, of course, believes that we are born sinners. Yeah. So that, of course, whereas the Hindu belief would be you're born divine. At birth, you're at your purest state, as it were, because you're unsullied by ignorance.
But considering reincarnation, don't you bring a karma at birth?
That's not necessarily sin. You're born with a set of things that you have inherited from your past life, but those things you can actually change. They're not something that you cannot escape. You can, with certain behavioral patterns, transform your own karma. That's why even in sort of Indian palmistry, they say that the lines of your hands keep changing depending on the work that you do.
Wow.
Now, whether you believe palmistry or not, that's an entirely different subject. But I think that's a very interesting idea, which basically says that, because if we believe everything is karma and everything is predetermined, then what agency do I have? It's a good question, right? Then I should just sit at home and whatever will happen to me will happen, right? But that's obviously not true. I still have to make the effort for something to happen. It's just that I should not be attached to the result. But I still have to make the effort. Mm-hmm. Because if I start to believe that everything is karma and everything is predetermined, then my agency disappears completely. Then it's an escape route. Everything I would say, because I was predetermined to behave like this, so I behave like this. No, you cannot escape your agency. You have a choice. You have a karma, a karmic debt, but you also have a choice. You can, through your choices. That's why even in every lifetime, people have the potential. I mean, what is meditation? Meditation is only a process to self-elevate, right?
Yeah.
And to free yourself from your karmic burden.
Are you convinced that reincarnation is a fact?
I don't know. I am convinced that prescient human beings may, in some cases, have a sense of identity which is greater, larger, bigger than their current lives. But whether that means reincarnation or not, I would hesitate to pass judgment on that.
Yes.
Because I think you have to reach a particular level of spiritual evolvement to really pass a comment on that. But I do believe that at a particular level of spiritual evolution, you are tapped into identities and ideas which are much greater than your current experience of your current life. Because let me put it another way. I do believe that one can perceive the world and our lives beyond the senses. Most of us can't. Mm-hmm. But I do believe with spiritual evolution, you can look at the world or observe things or feel things beyond the senses. And at the moment, most of us are trapped in these five senses. But I do believe meditation allows you to tap into realities or truths that go beyond the five senses. And unless one gets there, it's very difficult to answer questions about reincarnation. I had this great monk I was once listening to, and somebody asked him, what about reincarnation in past life? And he smiled and said, but you have not been able to do anything in your present life. Why do you care about your past life?
That's very good.
So think about your present life. You're not being able to spend 1 minute truly without your mind, destroying the present. You're not being able to live in the present for a moment without your mind destroying it for you.
That's a great insight.
Not even for a moment. You are concerned about your past life. Why do you care? You worry about whether you can be in this present moment even for a single moment without your mind interfering. And I think there's a valuable lesson,
Of
for people like you.
of course it is. Of course it is.
Because it is, and this is the thing, Patrick. I just want to add one more thing here.
Yeah.
See, because Hinduism is so vast, and especially to a Western mind, so esoteric and so exotic in many ways. There are all these gods and goddesses and past life and this, that, and the other. It's very easy to get exoticized and distracted by all of this and forget the core lesson, which is that can you even be in the present for one single second without your mind interfering? But you see, nobody wants to do that because that's a really tough thing to do. So it's much better for all of us to get distracted by the color and the past life discussions and tantra and the naked sadhus.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I know. But I think
I'm not suggesting. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting you are saying it like that. But I'm just saying this is what happens. This in these discussions.
Yeah. But I mean, these parts are also there because it's so vast, this Hinduism and India as a culture also. Yes, so of course, but it depends. I think it depends on your personality, what you want to see or what you want to get from this tradition. So, for me, I'm much more interested in the sort of esoteric parts than other parts, but still I'm fascinated, for instance, by the Naga sadhus and other things like that. So because it's so very different from the world I'm living in Sweden,
Yes, of course. But my only argument is that interest in such matters is absolutely fine, but I'm just saying that at the end of the day, those things, whether it's a Naga sadhu, whether it's tantra, whether it's any of these other elements, these are practices held by people who have gone to a different realm of experiencing life. So it's very difficult to truly understand that realm without first going deeper oneself. Because unless one is able to go deeper oneself, all of this looks like a sort of orientalized, exoticized color. But I think to truly understand it, I think one of the journeys is an inner journey to truly understand, what's happening inside us, to understand what those people might really be experiencing, because clearly they are experiencing life at a very different perspective, for the lack of a better word. But that perspective cannot come without deep inner evolution, is my argument.
Considering another sort of level of Hinduism, what gods or goddesses do the faithful turn to and pray to during the pandemic?
So I think, of course, there are, like gods of the Shitala Mata in certain parts of India, like the goddess of cooling tempers, so to speak. And by temper, I don't mean like angry people, but like literally like fevered bodies and so on and so forth. But actually, the Hindus would pray to whatever is their family deity in any moment of crisis. If they usually pray to Krishna, they would pray to Krishna. If they usually pray to Shiva, they would pray to Shiva. If they usually pray to Ganesha, they would pray to Ganesha, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
If they usually pray to the goddess, they would pray to the goddess, and so on and so forth. There are goddesses who are also, who specially are for fevered, like for illnesses and so on and so forth. And you can see where this would have come from. It basically comes from, rather, rainy parts of India where in the marshes and stuff, people would get fevers easily and so on and so forth. So obviously they imagine God to be, like this genteel woman who would come and, take care of you and treat you if you're unwell. And it became Shitala Mata, right? And in their imagination, that's how they perceived God to be. Mm-hmm. So that's how it is in each area. Each sort of, set of people imagine God in the way that they thought was most interesting.
Yeah. And that's what we do all the time, all of us. we have this personal image of the divinity or God or whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then we can get sort of inspiration from different sources, maybe from the Bible or from the Gita, of course, also. So,
But I mean, think about it. I mean, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are quite different.
very different indeed.
And of course, Christ is very, very different from earlier iterations of the faith, right? I mean, Christ's message itself is revolutionary, even within the tradition of that faith.
And we haven't really grasped his teachings yet. It's still work in progress.
And it's a very important question, right? I mean, as you know from my book, grew up in a Christian school and so on and so forth. So I've always had abiding interest in Christianity, especially mystical aspects of Christianity. And I was watching this beautiful film called The Two Popes on Netflix. It's about Cardinal Ratzinger and Cardinal Bergoglio, Pope Francis and Pope Benedict, and their relationship and transition. And I found it fascinating. And there is this wonderful point, Patrick, which really appealed to me as a Hindu, where Pope Benedict tells, at that time, Cardinal Bergoglio, that, you keep saying, God is, the church must change, God doesn't change. And Cardinal Bergoglio says, of course, God changes. And then the Pope Benedict says, how can God change? I'm the truth and the light. Where would we meet God if God is constantly moving? And the Cardinal says, perhaps on the journey.
That's good. That's very good.
And that is so beautiful. That was so beautiful to me, That was so beautiful to me.
It is really beautiful.
I thought it was so well said that, God is not only a destination, God is also the journey.
The journey. That's a great insight. Important insight.
I think that's a beautiful insight. And then think about it. I mean, the Christ of the evangelical Protestants of North America and the Christ of Thomas Merton are very different, isn't it? Right? So it depends. I mean, whose Christ are we talking about? Are we talking about Christ as defined by people who put up billboards in, red states in America asking for money? Or are we talking about the Christ who Thomas Merton experienced as a Benedictine monk in his little cave-like room that he spent most of his monastery that he spent most of his life in, and he experienced the living Christ walking beside him, right? I mean, so which Christ are we going to go by?
That's a good question.
So I'm trying to say that, while Hinduism is obviously diverse, but so is Christianity, I would argue, in some ways, It's just that the diversity has become merged and uniformized and so on and so forth. So not a lot of people think about this diversity these days. But for somebody who's really interested in religion, like me, notices this diversity, including in Islam. I mean, the faith which is most commonly understood as this monolith. I mean, and part of the problem is the people, quote unquote leaders of the faith themselves think of it as monolith. But is it really true? I mean, think about it. I mean, whose Islam are we going to go by, Patrick? Go by the Islam of Ibn Wahab, who founded Wahhabism, the puritanical version of Islam? Or are we going to go by, in the first century, are we going to go by, the man who said, Mansur al-Halaj, the great Sufi mystic who said, Anal Haq, I am the truth, right? And I would argue, from Thomas Merton to Mansur al-Halaj to the great mystics in the forests of India who said Aham Brahmasmi and Tatmamasi, they were all tapping into the same idea. That there is a personal manifestation of the divine. And what happened to Mansur al-Halaj? They cut off his head. The Wahhabis cut off his head. They said, you blaspheme, right? But he tapped into the same truth, That's why he said, Anal Haq, I am the truth. So there was this tradition in Islam too. which later on got subsumed by other things in politics and all kinds of things. But I'm just saying there was this tradition where, there was a direct connection with God. You spoke directly to God. Even today, when the great Sufis sing, I mean, they're singing directly to God. It's the master and the, and the pupil and so on and so forth. But we digress. But I'm just saying that we have to, I mean, I think the pandemic is also helping us ask the question, even in religion, what kind of religion do we want to embrace? What does religion really mean? And in the same film that I was talking to you about, Cardinal Bergoglio says, did Christ turn away anybody? And he quotes this verse from the Bible, which says, first bring the sinners. If you have sinned, come to me. And he says, well, but is that what the modern church is doing? We are turning away the sinners. But did Christ turn away the sinners?
He did.
In Buddhism, they ask the great question, Patrick, and perhaps it's important for all religions to ask themselves the question, would the Buddha like Buddhism?
That's a good question.
Right? And I think we can ask the same question. Would Jesus Christ of Nazareth like Christianity? And I think each faith should ask themselves this question, that what is the sort of political manifestation, socio-political manifestation of religion compared to what the originator taught, the original mystic taught? Because it's hard to imagine that what religion has become, and including Hinduism, in many ways, the way it's practiced, I mean, does it always reflect the ideals enmeshed in Hinduism? No, of course not. Of course not.
Most of the time, I think that the goal for the spirituality process should be that you yourself connect directly to divinity. So I mean, like Buddha, Jesus, or other personalities, they are sort of doorways. Choose them as a way to experience divinity yourself on a personal level.
But that's absolutely true. I mean, remember, at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the great text of Hinduism.
Yeah, it's truly great.
Krishna explains the truth to the warrior Arjuna in the battle of Kurukshetra on the battlefield. At the end of the Bhagavad Gita, what is Krishna saying? He says, well, I have told you all these things, but you must experience it for yourself.
Important lesson.
What did the Buddha say? What did the Buddha say before going away? You would be doing great disservice to Dhamma, the way the Buddhists call Dharma, to the path of enlightenment. If you only follow me, you must experience it for yourself. So don't take my word, experience it for yourself. So, I mean, but I think we have forgotten that, right? I mean, I think we have forgotten this idea that we must think of it for ourselves or imagine it for ourselves or know it for ourselves. And this lesson has been forgotten. And I think the world is changing. I think more and more people are understanding the value of something like meditation. But think about it, Patrick. I mean, has there ever been, before our times, the times that you and I live in, has there ever been a time in human history where human beings have not kept away time for an inner life? No. I mean, even in an earlier generation, and one would say this was just empty ritual or whatever, but people still used to, Sunday they would go to church and, people would go to the temple and so on.
And they would pray on a daily basis also.
There would be some inner life. In the last 50 to 100 years, we have completely destroyed that inner life.
True.
Completely wiped it out. There is no scope for inner life. And I am arguing that it's not possible for us to live without an inner life. A material life alone will not suffice. It cannot suffice.
And maybe now in the time of pandemic, maybe that's an insight also that people can reach, because they have to spend time alone in their homes, and these everyday distractions, they move away a bit. So let's hope that people listen inside to the inside,
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope they don't do what supposedly happened in Wuhan. The moment the lockdown lifted, Hermes had its record sales, $2.4 million of sales from one store
Oh.
in revenge buying. So the moment it opened, everybody went and bought
Yeah,
Hermes.
yeah.
But human beings, human beings, I mean, human follies and so on and so forth. But I truly hope that many people, including many people who will be listening to your podcast,
Yeah.
take this time to truly reflect what their lives are all about. What are they doing? And why are they leading the life that they're leading? Why? What does it mean?
You encounter hope in many people now. I mean, this reflection we are doing here on the pandemic, that it's something that could lead up to a change, a hope for a
Yeah.
better society. I think many people harbor that hope, and that
I
hope
hope-
collectively can actually be the force leading up to some change, real change.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. I certainly share that hope. I deeply share that hope. And I really hope it would bring some change. I really hope it would bring some change.
But I think change can only come about if this need for change is experienced in every individual and becomes a collective force also. Because everyone has to ask himself, what can I change? What can I bring to this table of change, or this hopefully new society after the pandemic?
I completely agree. And I think even if people have spent a few minutes of genuine contemplation, free from the tyranny of their minds, this period would have been a blessed period for them. Even a few minutes, just a few minutes. I'm not saying every day, many hours, nothing. Just a few minutes. Truly not tyrannized, not bullied, not, bulldozed by your mind.
For how long time a day do you meditate?
Between half an hour to 2 hours.
Once a day, twice a day?
It depends. It could be twice a day, thrice a day even. It could be once a day. But I try to take out some time.
Do you sit down for 2 hours sometimes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I could, and sometimes I sort of, go through a period, then I get up, I do something else, and I come back to it. It depends on how I'm feeling. I have been fascinated after writing Being Hindu, how many people from around the world have reached out to me for conversations about this. And I think we are living in a time of unprecedented interest from around the world on themes such as this. I think people are genuinely interested once again in inner life. And I think it's important to, for these conversations to happen. It's not that everybody will immediately find the truth and so on and so forth, but that a hunger is growing among human beings once again for a new way of looking at their life and to find an inner truth, I think is a very, very positive thing. And I'm really glad you reached out to me. And I'm really, really happy and thankful that we could have this conversation.
I think so too. I appreciate this tremendously. Thank you very much for your contribution to Magiskt Tänkande.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Bye.